Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Push with Nick and KP. We are here to do another episode of If We're Being Honest. We've had several ideas come up over the last couple months, but just haven't been able to put them on air, just for whatever reason, scheduling conflicts, what have you, life, if you will. But we are back with another episode. This will be the third episode of If We're Being Honest, and the theme for this episode will be NXT. Often consider this KP's baby. This is his bread and butter. He, unlike myself, has been a dedicated fan to NXT. I think for as long as it's been on air, right, KP?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, from the very start, we're going back to like the the trials and the very old school NXT before it changes to what we know it is today. So yeah, very different. That talent based show that it used to be. Very strange vibe, but yeah, definitely prefer the way that it is now for sure. But anyway, over back to you. Let's get started with this. All right.
Yeah, and I think it's very much we've come a long way from the black and gold era, and I think I like I mentioned I loved it in the black and gold era, but then I kind of teetered off a bit, and we started this podcast back up religiously. Finally figured out what worked and what didn't, and I've been watching it obviously religiously since, and a bit before that, and it feels like week in week out it's usually close to, if not the best show. So. It's hard because it's always been hard for me because it's hard to just due to the nature of the developmental brand. People can leave on a whim, but so that's always been a bit of an issue for me. But kind of getting into that for the topic of our show, the current roster of NXT, I think you could argue is one of the better, if not maybe even best. I think you could argue that NXT has ever seen. Most of which this talent is homegrown. Obviously there are some exceptions there, but yeah, with a while back, it was very much women's dominating NXT, but I feel like it has evened out a bit. I think obviously the women's side having lost Roxanne and Stephanie and Julia to main roster. I think it has evened out a bit. KP, how do you feel about this current roster in NXT, comparatively speaking? Historically, do you think this is one of the better rosters? And do you feel like that the men's roster is finally competing with the women's?
It's kind of a tough one to say like where this NXT stands in the test of time because I think throughout the course of NXT, there's always been very, very, very good top talent, especially more so on the men's division in
Mm-hmm.
history. When you think of the likes of, you've had your Finn Balor's, your Samoa Joe's,
Mm-hmm.
um, your Adam Cole, Johnny Gargano's, Tommaso Ciampa's, Bron Breakkers. That you can go on forever, and you can do exactly the same for the women. You got the Four Horsewomen, who's obviously started off in NXT,
Yeah.
and you go throughout the course of time, especially some more recently, where the women's division has been so utterly stacked on
Yeah.
NXT. I think that where we currently stand right now is very interesting because the women's division has been so synonymous with NXT in the past. I want to say like 18 months, 2 years probably. Um, More so that it gets a lot more limelight than that of the men's division does, which is quite something. In wrestling, generally speaking, I think it's fair to say, normally the men, have the more of the spotlight. And that's no criticism to the women's wrestling at all. That's just generally speaking how it is normally perceived. But no, in NXT things have been very different, and rightfully so because the women's division has been, ridiculously good. But yeah, I think at the moment we come off the back of Julia and Stephanie Vicaire, and Roxanne Perez. Obviously three incredible top women's wrestlers for NXT, and now are doing their thing on the main roster and in their own ways, all killing it in retrospect. So to have lost all of those, but still have such depth that we've got in the women's division, the likes of Blake Monroe, recently debuting, Jordan Grace, who's going to be a star in NXT, Jada Parker, who's consistently there, Lola Vice, Kalani Jordan, Sol Ruka, Last Legend, you know, like people like Fallon Henley as well, JC Jane. Everyone does their own bit. Like I think there are so many women who are ready to take that top spot, and it's literally a matter of who's going to be next, who's going to do that. So yeah, I think the men's division we have sort of seen a little bit of a lack of depth especially in the last, I don't know, going back probably about like 7 or 8 months ago, especially. You look at now, you look at the like of Obafemi, who was obviously the top guy in NXT, and rightfully so. But I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Trick Williams, but he has improved so much, and he's obviously such a star for the company. Being the TNA World Champion as well, obviously that's crazy to think about, and that's exactly what reality we're in here in 2025.
Hmm.
Because it's not only that that's happening as well. JC Jane, the current women's TNA Knockouts champion, as well as the women's NXT champion. Like, I think it's just, yeah, the talent is just incredible. But you've also got the likes of Ethan Page, who arguably is doing his best work at the moment with the North American title, just coming off the back of a really good feud with Ricky Saints. And then obviously Javon Evans is on the up, and he's killing it at the moment. LFG, season one winner Jasper Troy coming on in, causing a storm, making way for himself. There's always opportunities in the men's division to rise up, and I think there are so many guys at the moment who really are sort of around the conversation. Even the likes of like Yoshiki Inamura, who's been away in Japan and come back over to NXT, and he seems to have like really sort of like done like a great job of interacting with the WWE universe and propelling himself up to a better position, making himself look very valuable in that sense as well. Yeah, I think there's just a really good blend of talent for both men and women at the moment. But yeah, I don't know. What's your stance? Obviously, you haven't watched NXT quite as long as I have, but like for what you've seen, like where does it stand for you per se?
Well, first of all, beautifully said. I think I don't think I could have summed it up better myself if I tried. But in terms of the women, I think it's obvious, especially before we lost Stephanie, Roxanne, and Julia. I think you could just without argument say that that was the best women's roster we've ever had on NXT. Not to say that those women are better than the four horsewomen and Asuka, who were at one time on NXT. I just think in terms of top to bottom, NXT talent at that point on the women's side was the best it had ever been. That being said, it feels like now. It's still very good. Obviously, we have some imported talent here from AEW and TNA and that sort of thing, and so that obviously helps. LFG as well. Jasper Troy coming on immediately, making his presence felt. But yeah, I think it's fair to say that this is, in my opinion, I think is still one of the best rosters. I suppose we could get down to nitty gritty at some point in the future and determine which roster is best, but I think certainly this roster is up there.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you specifically mentioned, the four horsewomen and Asuka and that women's division, which was insane. You think about what they've all done in their career and everything they've gone to at the moment in the past, like I don't know, like 15 years or so, 10 years really. Yeah, I think just that combination of Roxy, of Stephanie, of Julia, and everybody else who was involved as well at the time and still are now. uh, yeah, you've got. I think they're the two biggest times for women's wrestling in NXT, and I think I probably would agree with you. I think the latter probably is just a touch more impressive, a touch better. Because I think they've got the light is more on them, which you could say has been paved from the first example we're taking here from this. But I think maybe if you've given perhaps the four horsewomen and Asuka the opportunities that these women are having now. I mean, that's very hypothetical. Whether they would have been able to take women's wrestling to the same heights that Julia, Roxy, Stephanie, and everyone else has done at this particular point. Obviously, we don't know, but we think probably maybe. But it's a very very interesting point to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, and for me, and I think you could probably argue this for the last big women's revolution for NXT, just top to bottom. Like if someone got called up today, it wouldn't surprise me because they're all just that good. But
True.
moving on here, okay, so we have all of the singles champions shown here. I think first of all, let's go ahead and put some respect on JC's name because she was very much dubbed a transitional champion and then went on to, she's only defended twice, but she's put on, in my opinion, two of her best matches of her career, both at Evolution 2 and Slammiversary. So clearly, maybe a little better than she's earned her name for. KP, out of the champions, singles champions here, or you can list the tag if you want with Hank and Tank. Who do you think is the first champion to lose? And I'm going to remove JC's name, so I want that to be a caveat.
Yeah, I think respect is duly deserved. For JC Jane, based on what she's accomplished recently, she's proved a lot of people wrong. And yeah, if you'd asked me, a couple of months ago, 3 months ago, whatever, JC Jane is going to be, the, a two-time women's champion, including the TNA championship, I would have been like, no, no, she's not. So yeah, very surprised. But kudos to her, 100%. I think she's absolutely killing it right now. In terms of the, what you asked there about who would potentially lose their title first, I think yeah, I mean, Hank and Tank, they probably are my least favorite champions in NXT at the moment, and I could maybe see that happening. But I think I will stick to what we've got here in our singles champions. And I think that Trick Williams and his TNA championship is very much, very much a possible championship to be taken away from him very, very soon.
Yeah.
I'd probably say Trick, just because of how good TNA have been recently. Their talent has been absolutely killing it as well. They've got a few guys in and around the conversation looking to take the title from Trick. I think it's very competitive, and yeah, I'd probably go with Trick Williams, to be honest with you. What about you, though? Where's your head at?
Yeah, I think that's a great shout. I think obviously Trick has a lot of targets on his back, as do all these champions, just by nature. But yeah, I think with Joe Hendry and Mike Santana both really looking to get that title back, and obviously JC having taken another title from TNA at Slammiversary, I think you need to throw them a bone at some point. Otherwise, this relationship becomes kind of too one sided. I do think Soul is at jeopardy too with that Zarya stuff, but I think if I had to pick though between the two, I think I would probably go with Trick as well. As far as I'm concerned, Ethan Page and his new title, the new Canadian belt, he can have it forever. He's earned it after that promo last week and unveiling that new belt. And Oba Femi, we say it week in, week out. I have no idea who's going to beat him. Obviously, we've teased the Javon stuff over the last week pretty heavily, and then getting the nod from Undertaker. But if I had to put money on, I would probably also go Trick as well. But yeah, speaking of TNA, that plays a part into our next segment here, and that is the relationship between TNA and WWE. Just want to get your thoughts on how that's gone so far. Obviously, it's made for some very interesting matches and angles, but currently NXT, obviously the likes of JC Jane and Trick Williams both hold TNA gold. What's your thoughts on how that relationship has gone so far?
Yeah, I think the relationship's been pretty good. Up until this point, I think with a lot of TNA stars coming over to NXT, and maybe a lot of getting a bit more eyes on them as talents. I think that's only a good thing for for those individuals who have done that so far. The championship's getting a bit more exposure. Not to say that there's a lack of exposure on TNA, but just because obviously they're going to be appearing on two brands instead of one, naturally that is more exposure. But yeah, with Trick obviously holding the TNA championship, JC holding the Knockouts championship, I think it just does draw a few more eyes over. And I think, going back to Slammiversary, which obviously was a very successful show this past week, I think when you think about maybe if Slammiversary had gone on, as it would have done, regularly, televised, well, regular TNA PLE, without that sort of influence from WWE involved, maybe it wasn't JCJ, maybe it was somebody, on the TNA brand challenging Master Slamovich. If Trick wasn't the TNA world champion, if it was like, I don't know, for example, Mike Santana versus Joe Hendry, yeah, maybe not as many people would have tuned in. Probably still quite a lot, and they probably still would have had a very successful show. But I think it just does draw a few more eyes over. So I think, yeah, just I think it's just benefits here. Really, really are. Like, talent coming across to NXT, they're being seen more often, and NXT talent going over to to TNA. People working with each other and maybe like rubbing off on one another, maybe just advice being spread from side to side. Yeah, I can only see this really as a good thing, and I've been enjoying it. Some fresh faces on NXT. For myself personally, that's a good thing. I like seeing new people involved. Um, yeah, I don't have anything bad to say. It's been great so far, and it adds a little bit more of depth. Like you never know who's going to show up and who's going to be involved or whatever, and it makes for some very surprising, moments. And JC Jane being a very prime example of that. And as was Trick. When Trick beat Joe Hendry, I wasn't convinced that he was going to win the title. I thought it was a dead certain thing that Joe Hendry would retain, and I was wrong. So it makes for some good moments, and I've been loving it.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. I think the moments and the ability to surprise. The one thing I kind of was worried about was if, like, a former WWE talent like Elias Elijah comes over to NXT, would that kind of be a bit awkward? But it wasn't. Everyone was just walked in and everyone just received him like he hadn't been gone. So I love this. I think the only downside I would say is just that WWE currently holds two of their belts. But as we kind of alluded to, I don't think that's a permanent thing. So I think it's just kind of an angle at the moment. And I personally don't feel like, obviously, TNA got a couple of wins as well at Slammiversary over WWE. But I don't feel like it hurts them. I feel like the pros definitely outweigh the cons. Obviously, similar to the WWE's partnership with AAA, it only brings more eyes to the program. And I'm a prime example. Obviously, a dedicated WWE fan would have never watched TNA unless it was like a one-off that was recommended or something. Similarly, would have never watched AAA. But in the last few months, I've both watched a AAA PLE and even if it was mixed with WWE, it still is a AAA produced show as well as TNA Slammiversary. I'd never watched the Slammiversary before. I've watched matches from them, but I'd never watched that before. And so this partnership is exactly what I think their end goal is, and that is to bring more eyes on the product.
Yeah, and they are doing that. I think you made a good counter argument there with maybe perhaps the only con being both TNA world titles are on WWE talent. But yeah, I don't think that'll last too long, like you said. So I'm sure things will go back to normal, and TNA talent will hold TNA gold at some point very very soon, especially with that TNA World Championship that's on Trick's shoulder. I really don't see that lasting on there very very much longer. So yeah, I think it does. The partnership does sort of like promote more people to watch TNA as well for those who are only into WWE wrestling shows. So yeah, naturally speaking, there are lots of different types of fans, and maybe this will help fans change their perspective, change their minds, and just allow them to open themselves up and see more wrestling from other promotions, which is a good thing.
Exactly. And yeah, so, and this is kind of, speaking of Trick and him losing his title back to a TNA member, I think I've been hitting this pretty hard after he doesn't have that title. What's next for Trick? Because I feel like he's kind of done it all in NXT. And this is a good kind of segue into my final topic, which is it doesn't have to be the members listed here on the screen. Obviously, I think you could argue that these are the biggest stars currently on NXT. But our main event question, if you will, KP, give me five talent. You're in charge. The big hat's put on your head. You have to make the decision. Five members of NXT currently that you get to move up to main roster next week. And if you want, tell us which show they'll go to.
Yeah, this is tough. This is a tricky one. So I think naturally speaking, like you were alluding to, Trick William makes sense. Him losing his TNA World Championship and then naturally just having nothing else really to do on NXT would just give him maybe like I don't know one final feud with somebody, and then he could be quickly sent up to main roster. So I think he's got to be one of the five for sure, 100%. I think also for me personally, I wouldn't mind seeing JC Jane and Fallon Henley as a tag team sent up to main roster. I think that Jasmine Nix, although she is very much part of Fatal Influence, and I like keeping people together who are in NXT. I just think that maybe out of the three, she's just not quite on the same level as the other two. And I think that I think she maybe would seem a little bit lost on the main roster. As for the brands of those three, let's start with those three. Trick Williams, I think maybe putting him on SmackDown would be really interesting. With Carmelo Hayes, not so much with him, but just on the same brand as him. I think there could be some gold interactions there between the two of them. Now that they're both heels as well, I think the last time we saw them, it was very much heel Mellow and face Trick. So, difference of personalities coming across there, and they've changed since then. So, I would love to see another moment between the two of them. For Jason and Jason, for JC and Fallon, combining the two there, they are now Jason. I think I'd probably send them onto Monday Night Raw, just to sort of like add to the women's tag team division over there. I think that'd be quite nice to get them on, the flagship show. I think is what they're still known as over on Raw. But yeah, I think just having another women's tag team on the main roster is a good thing. And considering the women's tag team titles never really go to NXT, I just think that would be a great way to get them started on the main roster. As for two other talents, this is where things get a little more tricky because I think they are the three top ones for me. I think possibly if I mean, I'm loving Ethan Page's work with the North American Championship. I don't want him to lose the title, but say for example, if he did, I think he'd be a shoo-in to go to main roster. I
Yeah,
don't, I
yeah,
don't, I don't see how he would ultimately fail up there. So,
right.
I think he's ready for it. But that's not to say that I think he should go there now. But the second he loses that title, yeah, I'd send him straight up. I think he's perfectly ready and suited to go there. I wouldn't mind seeing him on either of the main roster shows. I'd probably put him on SmackDown, perhaps, just sort of like uh, I just sort of like boost the situation over on SmackDown. I think he'd be a really good fit to sort of like bulk things up over there and just to add a fresh face and some really good talent over there as well. For one more person, this is tough. Um, I'd probably send Sol Ruka up, to be honest. And again, maybe that would be her losing her North American title. Obviously, that would be the way it has to be. But she's been on SmackDown pretty recently. She seemed to have a great reaction on there. Working on Evolution as well with Zarya in that tag match. I think that she swims, right. She doesn't sink at all, and she'd be ready for whenever opportunity comes calling. So I guess they would be my five. Um, yeah, I I think you could argue some other people as well on this list, but I think there are people who probably would benefit more from some more time in NXT. Whereas these particular five, I think they've done a very good job, and I think that they would just fit naturally up on the main roster. What about you, Nick? Well, where's your head at? You got any similarities to me with those five, or you got some different people to say?
Well, you invited me to argue, so don't worry, I will. But the I do have some similars. I do have one question for you. Does Soul could come up with Zario, or does Soul could come up as on her own?
I mean, that's a good question. You could keep them together as a tag and have them, as another tag team up on the main roster, which would ultimately just boost the depth of that division.
We could
Which we've,
definitely use some depth on the main roster in the women's for sure.
yep, yeah, we've spoken about that quite a lot in the past. So that wouldn't be a bad thing. But honestly, I think Zarya is a solo on NXT. I think she's got a bit to give there. So
Yeah,
I wouldn't mind seeing her just completely free.
yeah, I agree. It feels like we've but just barely tapped her potential and what she could potentially be
Yeah.
on NXT. For my five, I think I'll start off with the biggest one I think you missed. And again, I could have made a better caveat at the beginning, but obviously you get called up to main, you have a title on you. You're going to drop the title. It's kind of what we saw with Vicaire, I think, there a while back. But I think the biggest ready to go guy or guys are Trick Williams. Obviously, I'm a huge fan, and Obafemi. I think Obafemi could get called up today, as could Trick, and they could make huge waves. I think those are probably the two biggest talents, I think, on NXT that could get called up and make a huge impact. As far as brands, yeah, I'd love to see the Trick Carmelo, run it back there. I think Carmelo has struggled on main roster for whatever reason. I couldn't tell you why, but I think that rivalry could maybe help get him jump started again. And then Obafemi, I don't feel like we have that really big guy solo star. Obviously, we have a couple of big guys in Braun and Bronson, but they're very involved currently now, but I feel like we don't have that big kind of monster on main roster right now. I feel like Elba would very much fit that bill. Um, a lot of people saying that Blake Monroe should have went straight to main. I just haven't seen enough of her yet. Obviously, I like what I've seen so far, but I haven't seen enough of her yet to feel like she should take that spot over the others. The other one that I feel like is a shoe-in is Ethan Page. I would argue he's not much below Trick and Oba. He just has, again, love the work. Just alluded to how much I love the title, his brand new title. But everything that man does turns to gold, and that's not the first time I've said that. He just has it, and I think obviously he would make it work on main roster. Funny enough, hyping up the women, but then 3 of my 5 picks are men. But as for the women's side, I feel like Jordan Grace is the obvious answer for me. I feel like she, first of all, turn her heel and then put her on main roster. I think the dream matchups let them ensue. And then for my 5th pick, did struggle with either Kalani or Soul, but I think Kalani still does have work to do, at least on the mic. So I am going to go with Soul. I think Soul turned heads at Evolution, and I think she was very much over. I think just her gimmick is very simple and would very much work on the main roster. For the shows, honestly, I don't. I think Jordan being on Raw, I think Raw's women's division isn't quite as strong as SmackDown. So I put Jordan on Raw, and then I put Soul on SmackDown. And the other 3 men, just kind of put them wherever. I'm not too particular on that. But yeah, I think so. I think our main differences were I did Jordan and Oba, and you did JC and Fallon. But like I said earlier, I think overall we could argue that any of these people could be put on main, and we wouldn't be like, what are they doing? NXT is just that good.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of your names. Just to put it out there, I think that they would also do very well on the main roster. I think the main reason why I omitted uh, Obafemi from my selection, just let me explain a little bit where my head's at, is because if you look back to his recent title match defenses, you got Yoshiki Inamura, Josh Briggs, and Miles Bourne. 3 guys who necessarily you probably wouldn't expect to be in the title picture, but have had very good matches with Oba, and the feuds have been pretty good as well going into those matches. So for me personally, I think that Oba does a very good job of making some very good matches with maybe some people who you wouldn't expect to.
Yeah.
I think with the men's division, maybe not being quite as star-studded as the women's one, but is on the up, and we've obviously spoken about
Yeah.
that already on this very podcast. I think just taking someone like Obafemi away from the situation at the moment maybe is a little too early for me. And I think, he's doing such a great job. I think just let him roll with it for the time being. That's just basically where my head's at. But yeah, that was the reason why I omitted him. But yeah, everybody else, I would, even over, not excluding him at all. But yeah, I think Jordan would be great on main roster as well. She really, really would be.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think Oba obviously does enhance the other talent. You could say that about a lot of these guys and women as well on the roster. But yeah, that was my big main event question. I felt like that really made us think. KP did not get much time. I got a little more time to prepare. That was pretty much on the spot for KP. So job well done there. But yeah, I've been wanting to do this one for a while. Obviously, have several other ideas for these, if we're being honest, episodes. But this is very much your baby, and I was looking forward to getting you some time to talk about it. So
Well, thank you very much. It was, it's always good to talk about NXT. It is something that I really do watch, very intently every single week, and I've just loved it. From the very old school. I say old school. It's not old school really, but you just from the early days of NXT. Being that talent show and being very very different to what we have now, going into the likes of Sami Zayn, Cesaro, Shinsuke Nakamura, Cassius Ono, just like people like that who when they first when they were first around and killing it on NXT, and you're going into your black and gold, your NXT 2.0, which is a little bit of a rough time, but that feat that actually turned itself up pretty quickly. And then the NXT that we have today, there have been some different colors and different schemes, but ultimately at the end of the day, it is a very good developmental service that coincides with the PC, and it just does such a great job of producing some top stars in the company. The likes of, we can talk about them like Seth Rollins, Roman Reigns, Tiffany Stratton more recently maybe. Um, just people who have come from NXT, from the Performance Center, from the other programs they've got going at the moment, even the likes of Evolve and LFG now. It's just an ever growing conveyor belt of talent, and it's just incredible. It just keeps on growing. So yeah, does hold a very close place to me. Very passionate about it all, and yeah, it's great to talk about it. So I've said enough. I've said enough.
No, and that's exactly what I was looking for. This is why I wanted to do the NXT branded episode of If We're Being Honest, because I just know your passion for it. You can see it there. You can hear it there. It is obviously unrivaled. I love your passion for NXT, and coincidentally enough, has gotten me pretty passionate about it as well. But in terms of calling it old school, it did start in 2012. So it has been 13 years. So it almost getting to a point where we can kind of call that old school. If you didn't feel old today, there's your dose of it there. And you talk about the never-ending talent. LFG, which you and I both watch, has tons of talent as well. We could probably do a whole episode on that as well, and we have talked about it. But the number of stars that are just sitting there waiting in LFG, I think, could continue to make NXT the ever producing talent machine that it is. But with that, this has been the third episode of If We're Being Honest, and this has been The Push with Nick and KP. We very much look forward to these episodes. They're a little more natural, a little more raw, uncut, and we look forward to bringing another episode here soon. But until next time, this has been The Push with Nick and KP. We'll see you then. Take care.